The tower had been empty for 12 years. So what was tapping above me when the wind was completely still?
Ruth Calder slid a razor blade beneath the corner of the county lookout patch and worked it through the first row of stitches. The thread resisted in short, dry snaps. When the patch finally came free, it left a shield-shaped shadow on her dark green field jacket, the cloth beneath it several summers darker than everything around it. She set the patch face down beside 3 unopened bills on Mina's kitchen table. Her older sister stood at the counter fitting a lid onto a travel mug. She looked at the bare place on the jacket but did not tell Ruth to sew the patch back on. Mina had stopped offering that kind of comfort after the first month. Ruth opened the smallest bill. Her checking account held $612. The number looked temporary even before she subtracted anything from it. Her phone began vibrating against the table. Daniel Voss, Mina said, reading the screen from across the room. "I can see that. You could answer it." Ruth let it ring once more before lifting the phone. Calder. Daniel's voice carried the low, mechanical hum of the county maintenance yard. "I have 10 days of inventory work. Remote site temporary contract. $14.80 before taxes." "What site?" "Crowglass." Ruth looked at the removed patch. Crowglass Fire Tower had been empty for nearly 12 years, its steel frame visible from the eastern highway when the air was clear. During training, she had learned its history in a single line beneath a photograph, "Decommissioned lookout access restricted removal pending." "I'm not certified for tower work anymore. You won't be watching fires. The demolition crew mobilizes after the 10th day. I need the equipment room cleared, the cab documented and salvage marked before they arrive. I'm not allowed to climb county structures. Not until I inspect it. After that, you follow whatever restrictions I give you." The distinction was deliberate. Daniel never softened facts to spare a person embarrassment, which was one reason Ruth had answered. She asked, "Why me?" "Because you inventory accurately." Nothing in his tone suggested rescue or forgiveness. It was work narrowly offered. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Mina carried her mug to the door while Ruth listened to the contract terms. The county would provide fuel, a satellite beacon protective equipment, and a key to the seasonal gate. Half the money would be released when Daniel accepted the inventory. The remainder would come after the site was cleared. When the call ended, Mina placed Ruth's brown hiking boots beside her chair. One red replacement lace had come loose and trailed across the linoleum. "I haven't said yes," Ruth told her. "You asked about the payment schedule. That isn't the same thing." "No, it's what you do just before the same thing." Ruth bent to tighten the lace. "They still tell the Slate Creek story at the yard." "Probably. 47 minutes. That was how long the rescue team had searched the wrong drainage after Ruth relayed coordinates for 2 volunteer trail workers through heavy smoke. Both workers had come out alive. The official review had also recorded a missing trail marker, congested radio traffic, and a map last revised 9 years earlier. Those facts had not altered the sentence Ruth heard in her own voice proceed south from the fork. She had delivered an estimate with the clean certainty of an observation. Mina put her hand on the doorknob. "You made one bad call. Turning it into every call you'll ever make is another one." Then she left for the school office, taking the warmth of the kitchen with her. At 9, Ruth drove to the county maintenance yard wearing the jacket without its insignia. Daniel waited beside a mud-spattered utility truck. He was 47 square through the shoulders with a pale groove across his nose from years of safety glasses. Instead of shaking her hand, he passed her a yellow equipment case and watched while she opened it. Satellite beacon, first aid pouch, headlamp, spare batteries, paper sight packet sealed in plastic. "Test the beacon," he said. Ruth carried it beyond the metal awning, extended the antenna, and held the check button until the indicator flashed green. Daniel nodded once. "You'll camp below the tower. The stone room has water intrusion and the cab hasn't had a structural inspection since spring. No sleeping inside either one." "Understood. No climbing alone. No stepping onto a landing until I clear it. If the anchor points fail inspection, the cab stays untouched and you document from below." Ruth signed the equipment sheet. Daniel handed her the site packet last. A modern county road map lay on top, printed in pale gray and blue. Crowglass Ridge ran diagonally across its upper corner. Slate Creek Road followed the drainage below, ending at a seasonal gate. Several dotted paths appeared briefly among the contour lines and then stopped without explanation. Ruth unfolded an older photocopied map tucked behind it. More trails crossed the same slope. Some bore names the current sheet no longer carried. Which one governs access, she asked. The current road layer. That wasn't my question. Daniel studied her, then tapped the revision box with one blunt fingernail. The modern sheet governs county travel. The old one is reference only. Some of those trails are grown, over some are on land we don't control, and some may never have existed where the draftsman put them. Her father had once told her that a map was a promise about where the ground would be when someone needed it. He had been a county road surveyor and had distrusted any line too cleanly drawn. Ruth folded the old sheet along its existing creases. Then it shouldn't be in the field packet without a warning. Write one on it. She did reference only unverified. Daniel loaded 2 fuel cans into the truck bed. The demolition crew starts up the morning after your contract ends. If you find anything historically useful, photograph it and call me. Useful doesn't mean old. It means documented. And if the inventory takes longer, it doesn't. They left the yard in separate vehicles. Beyond, Alder Creek pavement narrowed to patched asphalt, then gravel. The road climbed through ponderosa pine and dark stands of Douglas fir. In shaded bends, old frost still silvered the grass at noon. Crowglass Tower appeared once between the trees, a thin square cab held above the ridge by 4 steel legs, and vanished when the road turned east. At the seasonal gate, Ruth parked behind Daniel's truck. A sign wired to the bars read, "Structure closed, demolition authorized." Above it, the foot trail climbed another 1.8 miles through timber. Daniel checked the lock while Ruth shouldered the equipment case. Wind moved across the upper branches, but the grass around the gate remained upright. A metallic sound traveled down from the ridge. 3 light taps. Ruth looked up. Crowglass stood against the high clouds, its exterior stairs cutting back and forth through the open frame. One landing appeared visibly warped. A roof panel on the observation cab had lifted at the corner, leaving a black seam beneath the metal. The sound stopped. Then 2 more taps passed through the tower's steel and faded into the trees. Daniel had gone still with the key inside the padlock. "Loose sheet metal?" Ruth asked. "Maybe." She took out her field notebook and wrote the time before either of them moved again. When she looked back up, the tower was silent above the locked gate, narrow and weathered against the October sky. Daniel pulled the padlock free and dragged the gate inward until its lower corner scraped a pale groove through the gravel. Ruth photographed the scrape, the demolition sign, and the number stamped into the lock before following him up the trail. The equipment case bumped against her hip for the first quarter-mile. Above them, Crowglass disappeared behind the timber, then returned in fragments. A steel leg through the branches. A flight of stairs suspended against the clouds, a square cab turning silver whenever sunlight crossed its windows. By the time they reached the ridge, Ruth could see why the county had chosen demolition. Rust feathered several stair connections. One corner of the equipment room roof had pulled away from the stone wall, and rain had carried a dark stain beneath it. A lower landing leaned enough to show daylight between its frame and one support plate. Daniel placed a red barrier 10 feet from the first stair. "Nothing above this point until I finish." Ruth began with the ground instead. She photographed all 4 sides of the tower, overlapping each frame, so the positions of cracks and missing bolts could be reconstructed later. The 4 galvanized legs rose 52 feet from concrete footings around an 18 by 24-foot stone building. Its rubble walls had been laid in uneven courses, with pale lime mortar still visible where the weather had not washed it back. At the uphill wall, pine needles and soil had filled the drainage ditch. Water stood against the foundation. "That should be cleared before anything inside dries," Ruth said. Daniel struck the steel door frame with the rounded end of his inspection hammer. "Inventory first, drainage after I know the wall isn't shifting." He unlocked the door. The smell came out slowly, wet stone, mouse nesting, and the mineral odor of old batteries. Ruth waited while he checked the timber lintel and the ceiling joists with a flashlight. Inside, a narrow workbench occupied the south wall. Empty battery shelves lined the east side, each marked with faded grease pencil. A steel records cupboard stood against the west wall. Water staining descended along the north stones but stopped several inches above the floor. Ruth set a numbered card beside the first object she photographed, an enamel mug with a split handle. She did not move it until its position had been recorded. Daniel returned outside to examine the stair bolts. For the next hour, the room changed by inches. Ruth separated rodent-damaged paper from intact manuals, tagged 2 corroded lanterns for disposal, and found a canvas climbing harness too brittle to bear weight. Beneath a shelf lay a narrow tin containing a brass sailmaker's palm and a spool of waxed linen thread. Someone had written Nell Vale across the lid in a black pencil. She entered the name on the inventory sheet and left the tin closed. Daniel called from outside, "I need your eyes on this." He had clipped into a temporary line and climbed only to the first landing. From there, he pointed at a connection plate beneath the second stair flight. Surface rust or section loss. Ruth stood beyond the barrier and raised binoculars. Flakes had lifted around one bolt head, but the edge of the steel plate remained square. "Surface until measured," she said. "The bolt may be worse." "Good. Don't promote a suspicion." He descended, then marked the lower landing with yellow paint. The warped corner would remain closed. A different stair approach appeared usable after 2 missing handrail bolts were replaced, but daylight was already thinning, and Daniel would not authorize a climb that afternoon. They cleared only the outlet end of the drainage ditch. Once Daniel confirmed the stone had not shifted, Ruth lifted wet needles with a trenching shovel while he cut a shallow channel away from the wall. Brown water moved reluctantly at first, carrying beetle wings and fragments of bark. Then the standing line against the foundation dropped by half an inch. At 4:30, Daniel checked Ruth's county wall tent below the tower, where the ground was level and safely beyond its fall zone. He tested the satellite beacon again before handing it back. "I'll return after sunrise," he said. "No stairs. If you hear metal moving, stay outside the footprint. What about the tapping? Write down when it happens. That's all. That's more useful than guessing." His truck became a low engine note below the ridge, then disappeared. Ruth heated soup on a camp stove and watched the tower lose its edges in the dusk. Without direct light, the cab looked less abandoned than unfinished, as if someone had stepped away during a long shift and forgotten to return. No tapping came during the night. Cold woke her before dawn. Frost had hardened the tent fly, and her breath clouded the beam of her headlamp. She pulled on her jacket wool cap and boots, then walked toward the tower with her notebook. The trees were still. She tied a strip of orange survey tape to the gate barrier. It hung straight down. At 6:41, 3 taps sounded above her. She wrote the time and air temperature, 28 degrees. After the pause came 2 more taps. Ruth moved outside the tower's footprint and watched the cab. Nothing visible shifted. The loose roof corner remained still. She checked the strip of tape, then the small mechanical wind gauge mounted to the equipment room wall. Its cups barely turned. By 7:15, sunlight reached the northwest side of the cab. The tapping repeated slightly faster. Ruth placed one gloved hand against the lowest accessible section of the flagpole assembly, where it descended beside the stair frame. A faint vibration touched her palm just before the next sound. Daniel arrived carrying a canvas tool bag. Ruth showed him the recorded times rather than explaining what she thought they meant. He read the page. Ground air's nearly still. The pole is warming. Could be both. From the bag, he removed a mechanic's stethoscope, its metal probe longer than a pencil. He pressed it to the flagpole's lower section and handed Ruth the earpieces. The next tap arrived through the instrument as a compact metallic knock, not the broad rattle of sheet steel. Something inside the hollow pole was touching the same point repeatedly. They checked the bent mounting bracket first. Daniel tightened its accessible fastener just enough to stop visible movement. The tapping continued. At the base of the pole, beneath a rim of old paint, Ruth found a circular inspection cap. She photographed it before Daniel loosened the 2 corroded screws. When the cap came away, a narrow counterweight hung inside on an old halyard. Sun-warmed metal had drawn the cable upward just enough for the weight to touch the pole. Daniel moved the halyard an inch. From the northwest corner of the cab, something shifted inside a shallow locker. Flag storage, he said. Old system ran through the wall. The sound had an ordinary cause, a loose weight, a hollow pole, and temperature changing faster than the air below. Ruth wrote each part separately, careful not to turn 3 observations into one certainty until Daniel tested the cable again. When he drew the halyard down, the locker door opened a fraction. Behind it lay a tightly folded red and white storm flag, its canvas darkened with age. A black line marked the lid of a repair tin on the shelf beneath it. Nell Vale. The lower counterweight turned slowly in the morning light, and the folded flag shifted once inside its locker. Ruth spread 2 clean cotton sheets across the equipment room workbench, smoothing each crease with the side of her hand. Daniel carried the retired storm flag down from the cab in a clear storage sleeve and laid it at the center of the covered surface. Before retrieving it, he had replaced 2 missing handrail bolts and rigged a temporary line past the warped landing. Ruth had climbed behind him under fall protection, touching only the route he approved. The cab was smaller than it appeared from below, a 7-foot square of cold glass around an empty firefinder pedestal. The flag had occupied a shallow locker beneath the northwest window, still clipped to the halyard after decades of disuse. Now it lay folded on the bench, its red canvas faded toward brick and its white field yellowed at the creases. Ruth placed sealed water bottles at the corners rather than flattening it with tools. She photographed the outside fold, removed 1 bottle at a time, and opened the flag only as far as the fabric allowed without resistance. The lower edge did not fall flat. Daniel crouched until his eyes were level with the workbench. Something caught in the hem. Maybe. I haven't tested it. Ruth measured the flag, recorded 3 tiers and 2 old patches, then compared the seams. Most had been made with an even double row of machine stitching. Along 20 inches of the lower hem, the thread changed color. Small hand stitches passed through the canvas at irregular intervals. She opened the repair tin marked Nell Vale. The brass sailmaker's palm inside had a shallow cup worn into its metal plate. Beside it lay a spool of waxed linen thread, darkened with age but close in color to the stitches in the hem. Daniel did not touch either item. That's enough to call. He stepped outside where the satellite phone could hold a signal. Ruth remained beside the flag, writing down what the evidence supported. The lower hem was heavier than the upper hem. Its hand stitching appeared later than the original seam. The repair materials might have belonged to Nell Vale. None of those statements proved that anything had been deliberately hidden. Daniel returned with a name, Eleanor Vale. County lookout records call her Nell. Seasonal duty here from 43 through 68. He checked the note on his palm. Her nephew lives in Alder Creek, Samuel Vale, 76. He says he can be here in an hour. Did you tell him what we found? I told him there's a flag with her name near it. The morning remained clear, but clouds had begun collecting beyond the western peaks. Ruth used this waiting time to inspect the equipment room's north wall. The stain below the failed flashing felt cold but not freshly wet. She moved the undamaged manuals to the south shelf and placed absorbent pads beneath the lowest point of the roof seam. Samuel Vale arrived in a faded blue pickup with a toolbox strapped behind the cab. He was a narrow man in a brown canvas coat, his white hair combed straight back. Before approaching the workbench, he stopped at the tower's southwest leg and placed his fingertips against the steel. She used to kick that one before she climbed, he said. Said a tower ought to answer before you trusted it. Daniel showed him the flag without unfolding it further. Samuel studied the repair tin first. His thumb hovered above the penciled name but did not touch it. That was hers. She wore the sailmaker's palm on her right hand. Fixed Flag's canvas water bags my school satchel once. Do you recognize this repair? Ruth asked. Samuel leaned over the lower hem. I remember the flag, not the sewing. I'd carried food to the tower during summer visits beginning when he was 9. Nell sent him home before afternoon storms and paid him a nickel to sweep the stone room. In 1957, wind tore the storm flag against its pole, and he remembered seeing it spread across her kitchen table afterward. What would she have kept in it? Daniel asked. Samuel's mouth moved toward a smile without reaching one. Knowing Nell, another list telling somebody what they'd forgotten. He did not claim to know more. With his permission recorded as family context rather than legal authority, Daniel called the county clerk. The flag remained county property, and the clerk authorized examination provided every step was photographed. Ruth placed a metric scale beside the hand stitching. She took a picture before cutting anything another, after selecting the first stitch and a third with the seam ripper held in position. The waxed thread resisted more than she expected. She severed one stitch and drew it free with blunt tweezers. Then another. The canvas released a dry smell of dust and cold storage. After 6 inches, a darker material appeared inside the doubled hem. Ruth stopped. Daniel angled the work light without touching the fabric. Samuel removed his glasses, cleaned them on a folded handkerchief, and put them back on. The exposed corner was brown-green and slightly glossy. Oilskin. Ruth photographed it in place. She opened 4 more inches of the later seam, enough to ease the wrapped object toward the gap without bending it. The bundle was long and flat, narrower than the flag itself. It had been fitted into the hem before the hand stitches were closed. "No one patches a tear that way," Samuel said quietly. Ruth supported the canvas while Daniel slid an archival board beneath the bundle. Together, they moved it out by less than a foot. The oilskin made a soft cracking sound, and Ruth halted until the material relaxed. A fold opened at one corner. Inside lay pale cloth backed with paper crossed by fine brown contour lines. A handwritten ridge descended toward a narrow blue creek. Along its upper margin in faded black ink were 6 incomplete words. "If the east road closes." The remainder disappeared beneath the unopened fold. Samuel gripped the edge of the workbench. "Juniper cut." Ruth looked at him. "What is that?" "Was." "Maybe." He glanced toward the east wall as if the ridge beyond it could answer. "An old stock trail. Nell said it came up from Slate Creek to the high gravel road. Families used it before the county put the lower road through. It isn't continuous on the current map. Most things stop being continuous after nobody walks them." Ruth drew the bundle fully onto the archival board. 8 translucent edges lay nested beneath the linen-backed sheet, thin as onion skin. Beside them was a sealed envelope flattened by years inside the hem. A small black-and-white photograph showed at the far end, but only a strip of sky and the upper rail of the tower were visible. Daniel counted without separating anything. 1 map, 8 overlays maybe, 1 envelope, at least 1 photograph. "Don't lift the overlays yet," Ruth said. "The folds may be stuck." The first rain struck the equipment room roof before he could answer. 3 hard drops sounded on the corrugated metal, followed by a steady rush moving east across the ridge. Ruth looked toward the north wall. A dark bead appeared beneath the failed flashing. It thickened, traveled along the timber plate, and fell onto one of the absorbent pads she had placed earlier. A second bead formed closer to the records cupboard. Samuel reached toward the map. "Not that way," Ruth said. She did not raise her voice, but he stopped. Ruth and Daniel lifted the archival board together, keeping it level. Samuel cleared the south shelf and brought the empty plastic document box from Daniel's supplies. They placed the wrapped map inside without unfolding it further, added the repair tin separately, and carried both beyond the drip line. The letter remained sealed. The photograph stayed mostly hidden. No one read the overlays. Daniel climbed a ladder only after checking the floor beneath it, then pressed temporary flashing tape along the accessible interior seam. It slowed the water but did not stop it. Ruth marked both leak positions in blue chalk and moved every surviving paper item away from the north wall. By the time the rain eased, the equipment room looked less like a site being emptied and more like one being protected. The change was small: a clear shelf, 2 dry boxes, a line of water directed into a shallow pan. None of it altered the demolition date. Samuel stood beside the open flag. "People thought Nell spent her years staring for smoke," he said. "She watched roads. Which families were cutting hay? Who had a truck running? Where the spring stayed open? Supervisors called it kitchen table mapping." "Did she keep other records?" Ruth asked. "If she did, I never saw them." Ruth looked through the south window toward the eastern drainage. Rain mist softened the timber until the slopes seemed to overlap. Somewhere below those trees, an old line might still cross the ground. A line on cloth did not make it passable. A remembered name did not make it public. The discovery had created questions, not answers. She returned to the workbench and wrote the visible phrase into her notebook exactly as it appeared, including the unfinished dash. Beneath it, she added root existence and present condition unverified. Daniel read the sentence over her shoulder. You want to keep working the inventory. The water comes first. Together, they carried the damaged manuals away from the north wall and set fans at the doorway to move dry air through the room. Samuel stayed to label the family information. He could confirm using a separate sheet so memory would not be mistaken for evidence on the original materials. Near evening, the clouds lifted from Crowglass Ridge. Ruth opened the document box beneath the work light but did not unfold the map. She raised only its linen-backed edge enough to check for trapped moisture. A hand-drawn line left the printed road crossed one pale contour and disappeared beneath the next unopened overlay. Ruth slid a sheet of archival polyester beneath the first onion skin overlay and lifted its brittle edge without letting it drag across the linen map. The county records room had no windows. Fluorescent light fell evenly over two joined tables and a small humidity monitor blinked beside the document box. Daniel stood at the far end with his hands in his coat pockets. Samuel sat close enough to read, but kept both palms on his knees. A fourth person entered as Ruth aligned the first transparent sheet. Leah Ortiz placed a rain-darkened folder on the table. She was compact and straight-backed with silver beginning at her temples and a pencil clipped horizontally beneath her watchband. Ruth had last seen her across the hearing room where the Slate Creek incident was reviewed. Leah nodded once. Daniel says you may have an undocumented evacuation route. We have an old line on a map, Ruth said. We don't know what remains on the ground. Good. Keep those two things separate. The first overlay was dated June 1946. Nell Vale had marked 2 springs, 3 family cabins, and a logging spur descending from Crowglass Ridge. Small circles beside the cabins matched a waterproof index card found in the flag. Each circle referred to a surname, the number of people in the household, and whether they owned a truck-tractor-horse team or radio. The second overlay recorded washouts from the spring of 1948. The third added clearings large enough to hold livestock during a grass fire. On the fourth, Nell had drawn arrows around a slope, burned during the 1951 Black Fern fire, then crossed out one spring with the note, "Ash in water, do not use." She updated conditions, Ruth said. She didn't copy the same route forward. Leah leaned closer. Dates. Every change has one. Ruth turned the fifth overlay. A line labeled Juniper Cut climbed northeast from Slate Creek, crossed a narrow bench, and joined a gravel road above the drainage. Beside it, Nell had written 3 different notations in 3 different years, stock trail, then foot passage, then check after hard rain. Samuel adjusted his glasses. My Uncle Wade used that cut to bring medicine down one winter. I thought it was one of his stories. Stories don't establish present access, Leah said. No, Samuel replied, but sometimes they tell you where to begin looking. The 6th overlay documented the 1957 Slate Creek fire. Nell had placed pencil crosses beside 5 properties and drawn arrows toward Juniper Cut. The 7th marked repairs made the following spring 2 drainage dips cleared, 1 retaining wall rebuilt, 1 fallen pine removed. 5 surnames appeared repeatedly beside the work. The photographs supplied their faces. 5 families stood below Crowglass Tower in work clothes, each holding an ordinary tool shovel, crosscut saw mattock, pry bar, and brush hook. Nell stood at one end with a clipboard under her arm. No one had written heroic language on the back. Only names, a date, and the sentence East Route open again before thunder season. The 8th and final overlay was dated September 1968, Nell's last season. Juniper Cut remained drawn, but its lower section had been changed from a solid line to a broken one. A note directed the reader to the sealed letter. Daniel looked toward the envelope. Ready. Ruth photographed both sides, measured it, and recorded the condition of the seal. The paper had not adhered to the map. She used a thin spatula to open the brittle flap where the old adhesive had already failed. Inside were 4 pages written in Nell's narrow hand. Ruth read the first page aloud. To whoever clears this tower after I am gone, the printed maps show the roads the county agreed to maintain. My overlays show where people went when those roads failed. The letter described spring floods, lightning fires, a child carried uphill with appendicitis, and cattle moved ahead of smoke. Nell did not claim she had managed those events alone. She named the road crews, ranch families, loggers, and teenagers who carried messages when the tower radio could not reach the lower drainage. Samuel turned his face away when his father's name appeared among them. On the second page, Nell explained why she had hidden the records. A supervisor had ordered old local maps discarded during an earlier attempt to close Crowglass. The official fire charts were retained. Her route overlays were labeled informal notes. She had sewn them into the storm flag because damaged flags were inventoried but seldom opened. The third page held no accusation. It gave maintenance facts: the east ditch filled after snowmelt, the spring crossing migrated after floods, and the middle switchback lost stones whenever runoff left the trail. Nell warned that property boundaries had changed and that permission once given by a handshake could not be assumed decades later. Ruth paused before the final page. Leah said, "Keep going." The last paragraph was shorter than the rest. A line, copied often enough, begins to look like truth. "Do not trust mine because I drew it carefully. Walk it. Check the water, the grade, the bridges, and the ground after rain. A map is a promise, but only if someone walks the ground again." Ruth lowered the page. Her father had used nearly the same sentence when teaching her to read survey stakes along unfinished roads. She could see his thumbnail pressed against a contour line, the crescent beneath it permanently dark with soil. For years, she had remembered the phrase as a lesson in precision. Nell's warning revealed the part she had neglected: a promise, had conditions, dates, and people responsible for checking it. Leah closed the incident folder she had brought. "Your report last August did not say you were incapable." Ruth kept her eyes on the letter. "It said you transmitted an estimated position without identifying the uncertainty." Leah continued. "The map was old. The smoke was heavy. The radio channel was crowded. All true. Your part was that one sentence. I know. Do you, because disappearing from the work isn't the same as correcting it." Daniel shifted his weight but did not interrupt. Ruth looked at the 8 overlays. Each one preserved an earlier sheet beneath it, while admitting that the ground had changed. "What authority would we need to inspect Juniper Cut?" she asked. "Inspection is different from opening it," Leah said. "I'm asking to walk it, document visible segments, verify current ownership, and stop where the evidence stops. No public access designation. No emergency recommendation until the route is checked from both ends." Leah removed the pencil from beneath her watch band. "Conditions: 2-person minimum. Logged check-ins. Weather window. We record springs but treat the water as unsafe. We use temporary markers and remove them afterward." Samuel said, "I can show you where the lower entrance used to be." "You can show us what you remember," Ruth replied. "We'll verify the entrance separately." A brief approval passed over his face. Leah wrote for nearly a minute. "I can authorize a limited field survey. Daniel handles site access. If you encounter private posting, unstable slope, or a missing crossing, you turn around." "And the tower?" Samuel asked. Daniel answered, "Still scheduled." The room became quiet, except for the ventilation fan. The map had gained historic value and possible practical value, but neither repaired steel nor canceled a contract. Ruth found that she preferred the answer that way. Nothing important had been made easy by being discovered. She returned the letter to its folder and placed each overlay beneath a numbered protective sheet. Then she opened her field notebook to a clean page. Across the top, she ruled 3 columns: known, likely, unchecked. Under the first, she wrote that Juniper Cut had existed and had been maintained through at least 1968. Under the second, she wrote that portions might remain visible between Slate Creek and the upper gravel road. Under the last column alone, she wrote, Juniper Cut. Ruth pushed the trenching shovel beneath a wet mat of pine needles and lifted it away from the equipment room foundation. Water shone in the hollow left behind brown with bark and granite grit. Daniel worked 10 feet downslope, cutting a shallow outlet through compacted soil. Neither of them touched the stone wall with a pick. The old lime mortar had softened where water stood against it, and one careless blow could loosen more than the ditch. When Ruth removed this last root-bound plug, the trapped water began moving. It circled once against the foundation, found Daniel's outlet, and ran into the grass below. "Leave the staining," he said. "It tells us whether the wall dries." Ruth had already set aside the wire brush. "I wasn't going to clean it." "You looked at it. Looking is still free." By noon, they had lifted the failed roof flashing at the north corner, removed packed debris beneath it, and installed a temporary patch that directed rain beyond the wall. Daniel dated the patch in black marker, so no one would mistake it for permanent work. Inside, Ruth shifted the records shelves south and opened the steel door to move dry air through the room. Samuel arrived carrying a flat box of photographs. Each image had a separate note identifying only what he could confirm. He had written question marks beside uncertain names. "My memory's not a county record," he said. "It can tell us where to check one," Ruth replied. They placed the photographs in the dry work zone. No one painted the stained stones or polished the rusted tools. By late afternoon, the visible improvement amounted to a clear drainage channel, a sealed roof edge, and 2 shelves no longer standing in damp air. Rain began briefly before dusk. Ruth went outside to watch the water. It entered the uphill ditch, passed around the equipment room, and continued downslope without touching the door. For the first time since she arrived, the building shed water instead of keeping it. At 8 the next morning, Ruth tied blue survey tape to a permitted marker post near the east drainage. She wrote the time coordinates and temperature in her notebook while Leah checked their radio against the county channel. Samuel had shown them the lower entrance from the road, then returned to his truck. What he remembered as an open stock trail was now a shallow depression between lodgepole saplings. The first half-mile remained readable. A bench cut across the slope at a steady grade, and old drainage dips appeared beneath layers of needles. Ruth recorded each one using photographs, compass bearings, and a GPS track. The devices agreed closely enough to establish the line, not its safety. At the spring marked on Nell's 5th overlay, they found water emerging 30 yards below the drawn position. "Still a spring," Leah said. "Different outlet," Ruth answered. She labeled it untreated and did not fill her bottle. Beyond the spring, wind-thrown timber covered the bench. They climbed around one trunk and found a retaining stone on the far side, then another. After that, the evidence weakened. Animal tracks divided through young fir, and the slope offered several lines that looked possible from a distance. Ruth followed the strongest depression for 80 yards. It narrowed against exposed soil above a steep drainage. Leah checked the time. "Your call." The missing section might have continued beyond the next shoulder. Ruth could feel the temptation to reach it before turning around to return with a complete line instead of another uncertainty. She removed the last piece of temporary tape she had placed. "We have it to 7/10 of a mile. Past here we have guesses." They retraced their route before the afternoon clouds lowered. At the marker post, Ruth opened her notebook and crossed out trail open to mile 0.7. She replaced it with historic tread traceable to mile 0.7. Leah read the correction and initialed the page. Daniel drove a galvanized bolt through the lower landing connection while Ruth held a backing wrench beneath the steel grate. Rust fell in flat orange scales and caught in the cuffs of her gloves. The replacement matched the diameter and load rating of the original hardware. Daniel painted a narrow white line across the nut and plate so future movement would be visible. On the warped landing, they installed a temporary brace with a red tag stating its date and restriction. "This gets us controlled access," he said. "It does not make the tower open." Ruth repeated the restriction in the work log. They stabilized the loose roof panel, measured the 2 cracked cab windows, and boarded the more damaged pane from inside. Daniel removed the bent flagpole bracket and straightened it at the maintenance yard before reinstalling it with new fasteners. When Ruth tested the halyard, the counterweight moved without striking the pole. Under an approved line, she climbed to the cab. Her boots sounded differently on every landing, one hollow one, tight one, rough with rust beneath the tread. She checked each buckle before transferring to the next anchor. The empty firefinder pedestal occupied the center of the cab. East of it, the map desk faced the drainage. Ruth laid a digital print of Nell's overlay against the glass rather than bringing the original material back to the tower. From above, she could identify the spring clearing and the first section she and Leah had walked. Farther northeast, a lighter strip crossed the timber, disappeared beneath a dense stand, and seemed to return near the upper gravel road. Daniel stood outside on the catwalk, one hand on the repaired bracket. "Can you see your missing trail?" "I can see places a trail might be. That wasn't my question." "No," Ruth said. "I can't verify it from here." The words left no bruise. She marked the possible corridor on the print with a broken pencil line. Ruth pressed a soil probe through moss on the upper slope until its point struck stone. She cleared the surface with her glove and found the squared edge of an old retaining block. Leah crouched beside it. "That's built, or placed for something else." A man farther down the slope answered without looking up. "There are 3 more in line below you." Owen Pike climbed toward them carrying a brush hook and a coil of orange cord. At 24, he led the 3-person volunteer crew assigned to clear drains along the upper gravel road. He showed Ruth the stones but waited while she photographed their spacing. From the upper end, juniper cut was easier to follow. Old axe blazes remained on 2 mature trees. A shallow tread descended through bare grass, curved around a granite outcrop, and approached the section that had disappeared during the lower survey. Near the middle switchback, the outer edge had slumped toward the drainage. The remaining tread was wide enough for careful foot passage, but dark cracks crossed the wet soil above it. Owen rested the brush hook against his boot. "We could trim that back and get people through." "People on foot," Ruth said, "not vehicles. Not unrestricted public use, and not before the drainage is repaired." He nodded. "That's what I meant." "Then that's what we write." They crossed one at a time without loading the damaged edge together. Below it, Ruth found the last retaining stones from the lower survey. The 2 interrupted lines met. She divided the trail into segments in her notebook. Stable tread received a higher confidence rating. Deadfall, the shifted spring, and the slumped switchback were recorded separately. A route could exist without being uniformly safe. Owen's crew remained below to finish previously scheduled drain clearing. They carried radios, rain gear, first aid supplies, and emergency food. Check-ins were set for every hour. At the upper road, Leah unfolded the forecast. Heavy rain was expected the following afternoon. Ruth drew the middle switchback as a broken line and wrote beside it, "Foot passage dry conditions only." Wind lifted the corner of the page. Far west of Crowglass, a dark band of weather had begun gathering above the valley. Rainwater lifted a broken branch against the Slate Creek culvert and rolled it sideways across the road. Ruth watched the painted center line disappear beneath 6 inches of brown water. The rain had begun before dawn on day 8. By noon, snowmelt from the higher slopes had joined it. The culvert took the first surge, then clogged with branches and gravel. Water cut across the shoulder and loosened a section of bank downstream. Leah's voice came through Ruth's radio. "Slide reported below, mile 4. Lower road is closed." Ruth unfolded the waterproof copy of Nell's map across the hood of Daniel's truck. Juniper cut ran above the flooded road, but its unstable switchback lay beneath the same rain. Owen checked in from the east drainage. All 3 crew members were accounted for. One woman, Kara Mills, had strained her knee when the road shoulder gave way. She could walk with support. They had rain gear, food, and a first aid kit, but the creek was rising between them and their vehicles. "Shelter is available at the old survey shed," Owen reported, 2 miles south. "Condition?" Leah asked. "Roof intact when we passed this morning. No heat." Leah turned to Ruth. "Assess the upper route." The words carried the same pressure Ruth remembered from Slate Creek. Too many voices, limited time, and people waiting for one clean answer. She looked at her notes before touching the radio. "Juniper Cut was verified on foot yesterday from both ends," she said. "It reaches the upper gravel road. The middle switchback has a slumped outer edge. We crossed it in dry conditions only. Current tread condition is unknown, and rain increases the likelihood of further movement. It is not a vehicle route." Distance for Owen's crew, about 3 miles with 900 feet of gain. Kara's injury may double their travel time. Your recommendation: inspect the switchback from above before anyone commits to it. If the tread has moved, they shelter. If it remains stable enough for controlled foot passage, we establish a hand line and cross one person at a time. Leah repeated the assessment over the emergency channel without removing a single qualification. For the first time, Ruth heard uncertainty travel intact through a radio. Ruth clipped the radio to her shoulder strap and entered Juniper Cut from the upper road with a county responder named Miles Avery. Rain struck her yellow shell in small, hard bursts. They reached the switchback in 40 minutes. Water had carved a fresh groove through its inner edge, but the retaining stones still held. The outer crack had widened by less than an inch. Ruth photographed it, measured the remaining tread, and drove no stakes into the soft soil. Passable miles asked, for careful foot travel with assistance. Not stable enough for two people side by side. They anchored an orange handline around a mature Douglas fir well back from the damaged edge. It was not a climbing system and would not bear a fall. It offered balance while each person crossed. Owen's crew appeared below through the rain. Kara moved between Owen and the third volunteer, placing limited weight on her left leg. Mud covered them to the knees. At the base of the switchback, Ruth explained the procedure. Packs crossed separately. Miles stood above the damaged section. Ruth remained below where she could watch the outer edge. The first volunteer crossed without disturbing the tread. Owen followed. Kara waited until both were clear. Don't pull yourself up with the line, Ruth told her. Use it only for balance. Short steps. Keep your weight inside. Halfway across a palm-sized piece of soil broke loose and slid toward the drainage. Kara froze. The stones beneath your right foot are holding, Ruth said. That part is known. Move your left boot 6 inches toward the wall. Kara obeyed. She crossed the remaining distance without another slip. Ruth went last. At the historic spring, the two groups stopped long enough to replace Kara's wet knee wrap and add an insulating layer beneath her jacket. The spring ran cloudy from runoff. No one drank from it. They reached the upper gravel road 20 minutes before dusk. Daniel waited with the truck heater running. Owen helped Kara into the cab, then turned to Ruth. You never said it would be easy. It wasn't. That's why we believe the rest. Leah documented the time of exit and closed the emergency channel. The route had carried 3 people out safely. It had not become a safe public road merely because it worked once. Before leaving, Ruth removed the temporary blue tape from the upper marker and coiled it into her wet palm. On day 9, Ruth placed 3 objects on the county meeting table: the archival box containing Nell's map, Daniel's structural report, and her rain-swollen field notebook. The Public Works Director read the immediate stabilization estimate twice. $8,700, he said. For a tower we were prepared to remove. Not for full restoration, Daniel replied. For drainage stair connections, glazing roof security, and limited service equipment. Demolition mobilization already has 4,200 committed. Leah presented the juniper cut incident without calling it a rescue. Owen's crew had been equipped and capable of sheltering. The route had provided a safer, faster alternative after current conditions were assessed. Samuel identified the 5 families in Nell's photograph. He did not ask the county to preserve Crowglass because his aunt had loved it. She wrote down what the place did, he said. You decide whether it can do useful work again. When Ruth's turn came, she kept one hand beside her notebook. The tower should not reopen for unrestricted public occupancy. The stair system needs an engineering review. Juniper Cut should remain closed until its drainage and switchback are repaired. Its segments need inspection dates and separate confidence ratings. The director looked at the historic map. You're making a cautious argument for your own proposal. I'm making the argument the evidence supports. She proposed a seasonal weather station radio relay and emergency cache in the stone room. The cab could retain its firefinder base and map desk. The original flag and records would remain in controlled storage with the digital copies available for field use. Daniel recommended redirecting the demolition mobilization money toward immediate stabilization. Donated materials and supervised volunteers could reduce the remaining cost. The county approved a 1-year administrative stay. Crowglass would be evaluated after an engineering inspection and 1 operating season. No one tore up the demolition order. The clerk stamped it, held, and placed it in the file beside Nell's weathered route index. Ruth pressed a new gasket into the east cab window while Daniel supported the glass from the catwalk. Below them, volunteers cleared the final length of the drainage ditch and carried damaged material down to the seasonal gate. Repairs continued beyond Ruth's 10-day contract. New galvanized bolts secured the stair connections. The warped landing received a permanent brace after an engineer approved the design. The equipment room roof was reflashed and its stone walls were allowed to dry without paint concealing the moisture stains. Every new component carried a date. Samuel worked with the county archivist to label Nell's photograph. He later donated her surviving notebooks, none of which contained another hidden revelation. Most recorded temperatures, supply requests, and the ordinary names of people who cleared roads after storms. The retired storm flag was cleaned only enough to remove loose dirt. Conservators mounted it flat beside the linen map. A plain weather flag replaced it on the repaired pole. Juniper Cut's failed drainage was corrected before the switchback was rebuilt with stone from the original slide. Trail signs stated that the route was seasonal, limited to foot travel and subject to closure after heavy rain. Each sign included an inspection date. Leah met Ruth in the stone room while Daniel stocked the emergency cache. The certification board will allow supervised re-entry, she said. Field observations, radio procedure, and navigation review. Ruth closed the supply log. I want route reports to separate confirmed conditions from estimates. They already should. I want the form to require it. Leah studied her, then nodded. Put the revision in writing. Samuel arrived before sunset with a small brass pencil sharpener from Nell's desk. Its blade had been replaced more than once and one screw no longer matched the other. This belongs somewhere. People still use pencils, he said. Ruth accepted it because it was useful and because it was small enough not to turn stewardship into ownership. Above them, the repaired flagpole moved silently in the wind. Inside the county archive, Nell's storm flag rested flat in its case. 7 months later, Ruth pushed a soil probe into the first drainage crossing on Juniper Cut and wrote the date on her inspection sheet. Late May snow remained in the shaded gullies, but the tread was mostly dry. She checked every repaired dip, photographed a fresh animal burrow below the switchback, and measured the distance between its upper edge and the trail. The ground had survived winter. That did not exempt it from being checked again. 3 hikers waited at the upper marker while she finished. Is the route open? One asked. Ruth looked at the inspection sheet. Open for foot travel to Slate Creek. There's wet tread below the spring, and the middle switchback is narrow. Stay on the inside edge. Only after she posted the day's condition card did she remove the temporary closure chain. Crowglass Tower stood above the trees with repaired windows and a secured roof. It had not been rebuilt to look new. Rust remained on the steel where it did not threaten the structure. The stone room still carried a pale water stain along its north wall, now dry enough to serve as a record of what the drainage work had corrected. Inside were blankets, medical supplies, sealed water, a radio battery, and an inspection calendar. Every item had an expiration date. Ruth climbed under the tower's seasonal access rules. Her dark green jacket still showed the outline where the insignia had been removed. She had completed 2 stages of supervised certification and would begin the final field review in June. No patch had been returned to her yet. Mina waited in the cab beside the empty firefinder pedestal. It was her first visit to Crowglass. She looked down at the volunteers repairing a trail sign near the equipment room. It doesn't look rescued. Ruth opened the weather log. It looks checked. Mina smiled. That does sound more like you. On the east map desk stood Nell's brass pencil sharpener. Ruth turned a county pencil through it, letting the shavings curl into her palm. A reproduction of the 1968 overlay hung on the wall, each historic route accompanied by its date and present status. The originals remained at the county archive. Samuel's labels now identified every person in the photograph and the ordinary work each family had contributed. Visitors could view the conserved flag and map without exposing them to the tower's changing temperature and light. The radio sounded. Crowglass County emergency. Request current western conditions. Ruth stepped to the window. Rain moved across the distant valley in silver bands. She read the instruments, compared them with the ridge, and pressed the transmit button. County Crowglass. Light rain west of Alder Creek, moving northeast, ridge wind southwest at 14. Visibility 8 miles. Estimated cloud base 4,800 feet plus or minus 300. Leah's reply came without hesitation. Copy observed conditions and qualified cloud base estimate. Ruth entered the exchange in the log. Below the tower, the three hikers passed the new juniper cut marker. Its sign included the date Ruth had inspected the ground that morning. They moved into the timber one at a time and followed the line Nell had drawn. The line 5 families had maintained, and the line present hands had walked before asking anyone else to trust it. A map was a promise, but only if someone walked the ground again. Ruth closed the logbook and placed the sharpened pencil across its cover. Beneath glass in the county archive, Nell's old storm flag lay still beside the map. Outside the cab, the new weather flag turned freely into the changing wind while the hikers descended toward a road that existed again because someone had checked it.